All right, we're talking about the glazed test tile wall. This wall is very useful, although of course, you know, it has its own little tricks and things like that. But let's start off by talking about it. First off, you'll notice right at the top, there is that top row right there that's designated by letters. And then over here on this side, we have a column that's designated by numbers. We have 23 glazes overall. And you'll notice if you start looking at the test tiles, A is the same as 1, B is the same as 2, C is the same as 3, D is the same as 4, E, 5, F, 6, on and on, all the way. What this test tile wall tells you is what order each glaze combination was dunked in to get a specific effect, right? So with our glazes, since of course what a glaze looks like before it's fired is nothing like what it looks like after it's fired, these kind of give you a little snapshot, a little thumbnail into what's going to happen when your piece goes through the kiln with that glaze combination on it. So now of course what order you apply it in can matter, sometimes not at all, but other times a whole lot. So for example, I always like this one, and this one here. All right, I'm going to come on up to you. Right, we have these two glazes, and they're both the exact same glaze combination, but it's just a different order of how it was applied. So the way it works is the first coat, and you can see up in the corner it says first coat, a little arrow for the letters. The first coat is designated by a letter. The second coat is designated by a number. So that means if I'm looking at this and this one says I2 and this one says B9, what you've got, again, same two glazes, just in different orders. So I is designating, you know, this color right here. And if I wanted to figure out the name of that color, we can look at the buckets themselves. The buckets are arranged in alphanumeric order, meaning A1, B2, C3, D4, blah, 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 blah. So if I keep going and I get to I can find it's this one right here, which is sapphire blue. So this is sapphire blue is the first coat. Second coat, 2. That's 1, 2, ghost white. So this is sapphire blue with ghost white. And then since this one is designated B, ghost white, 9, sapphire blue, this is ghost white with sapphire blue on top. So you see, sometimes it really makes a very big difference. Other times not so much. So each test tile will also give you information about what the characteristic of the glaze is like. Some glazes are much more transparent. So you can see in this one, for example, this little black line here. And the little black line is done with designer liner. And that helps us figure out how translucent it is. So you can see the black line very clearly in this one, whereas this one, you can't see that line at all, right? This glaze is much more opaque than this glaze. It also gives you an idea of texture. So, for example, you'll notice each and every glaze test tile has on the back of it this little cross carved in, and you can see how the glaze is responding to the texture that's been carved in. You can see how the glaze kind of breaks right here, and you see the color of the clay, you know, that's that white shining through, and then here where it gets thicker, it's darker, right? So you know that this glaze is going to be really responsive to texture. Whereas a glaze that is not as fluid or as flowy might not show that as much. So this glaze right here, you can still see that the groove was cut, but the glaze itself, it's very matte and very opaque, and so it doesn't flow around the texture quite as much. therefore the texture can kind of get muffled. I like to sort of use the analogy of, you know, the difference between wearing a thin gauzy silk shirt and wearing a thick all-encompassing wool sweater, right? Both are great. It just depends on what you want within that context and what your piece is looking for. But this can kind of give you some of those ideas. So we have the letter number on the inside that can give you ideas about what the glaze is and what order it's applied in. We have that black line on the inside of the grooves that gives you an idea about how translucent or transparent it is. And then we also have that texture that tells you what it's going to look like on a piece that has more texture, which is all pretty cool. It's a lot of information to get from one itty-bitty test tile. If anything, that can get kind of dizzying. One of the things I'll tell people when they're having trouble with glazes is to pick either a column or a row that you like and just pick from that, because it's lots easier to make a choice when you don't have this huge, you know, wall in front of you. If you can sort of narrow it down, it's easier to make those choices. Now, I do always warn people, though, when it comes to the test tiles, there is one big problem, and that's the problem of scale. It's the same sort of thing when you go and you pick out a wall paint from the hardware store. You pick out your paint color, and you know, it's this little chip that's like this big, and then you're like, yeah, that's the perfect color, and then you go home and you paint your wall with it, and you're like, that's not even close to the same color. And it's not that the color's wrong. Like, you'll actually go and put the chip up against the wall and you'll be like, huh, I guess that is the same color. It's a matter of scale. So the same is true with ceramics. You know, that little bitty test tile, it might have lots of information on it, but it's just small. So you might not get all of the information on it. And of course, so many things affect exactly what the glaze is going to look like, you know, whether it's the texture of your piece or the shape of your piece. Things that are low and flat, you know, the glaze is going to puddle as it gets liquid. Whereas if it's got a lot of vertical space, it's going to flow down as it gets liquid in the glaze kiln. There's just no way to know for sure ever when you're doing this, which to me in a way is kind of freeing. You're like, well, try my best, but you know, it's just going to happen. Whatever happens is going to happen. So this test tile wall, while I adore it and it's wonderful and an incredible resource, it also, just never get married to any one color exactly coming out exactly the same way. And another reason why I always encourage students to check out the Wall of Flame, because on the Wall of Flame you'll see glazes and things like that on people's actual pieces. So it's always much easier to really understand how a glaze is going to come out on your own piece when you're looking at somebody else's piece and you can see how it came out on their piece. It's just another vector in that information map that we've got going on here. I always like to encourage that.